Hi, my name is Steve Rahi. I am a premier field engineer dedicated to System Center technologies. Today's discussion is part 9 in an ongoing series regarding application deployment in Configuration Manager 2012. Today's discussion will take us back to the client side and this time focus on package deployment and some of the behind-the-scenes activities that take place during package deployment. So conditions and terms of use, copyrights and trademark information. And here's our agenda. So basically, to talk about the deep dive information, we start kind of asking the question, why do we care about the deep dive? So what we're going to be doing when I mean deep dive is really going behind the scenes, taking a look at the log, seeing how processing takes place for the packages, in this case, to deploy to the client. Pretty tedious stuff, really, in some ways, in a session like this, so hopefully we can keep it interesting. But why do we care? Well, one good reason is certainly for education, to understand a process and how things work on the client, whether we need it for troubleshooting or just to inform the way we use the product and be able to identify how things work. Another piece is there are certain components that we'll talk about as we go along that don't only have a play in packages, they have a play in other pieces of the system as well. And so once we learn those components and start to see how they act in one place, then we can take that information forward and apply it to other pieces of the system, other parts of the client, if you will, there as well. So certainly some good reasons to understand at the deeper level. So what are the goals for this session? Really, what I want to do is demonstrate a package deployment to you. I'm going to use the logs that I mentioned. I'm also going to go into WMI and show you some of the mechanism behind the scenes. This is not intended to be exhaustive and go through every potential process that takes place in the logs, go through every potential WMI component, namespace, whatever that's out there. Doing so would be a much longer session and would increase the tediousness of the discussion anyway. So hope to give you a really good flavor of how things work and so on just by walking through the logs. So before we get into the logs, talk about some logging tips. What I have on the right-hand side of the PowerPoint is just to give you a flavor of the kinds of things that take place behind the scenes whenever we run a package. So I should have a dividing line here, really, to help illustrate this, but I didn't. I also see another mistake that I put down there. Either way, this actually, imagine there's a dividing line here between the management point and the client. So everything below the dividing line is client processing. Everything above is management point processing. So what we have done in the previous sessions is set the stage. We've prepared packages for retrieval by the client. We've taken them all the way on the server side through the point of preparing policy for the client to download, telling it what packages to run. Now that we're on the client side, the first action that a client takes to download that policy is to request it. The first piece in line on the client side I wouldn't say the first, one of the first pieces in line on the client side to request the policy is this piece known as policy agent. This is the log file name. This is where I saw the other mistake, policy evaluator. This should be not provider. And here's the log name. So here, policy agent will actually make a request up and send it ultimately to the management point to request policy. So on a periodic schedule, by default once an hour, policy agent will make a request to the management point, find out, is there any new policy? So at this stage, we're not really talking about software distribution package distribution in specific. We're talking about any kind of client activity. Policy agent will learn about that by requesting policy. Once we learn about it, we have to process it and take further action upon it, which we'll see in a minute. So the process to do that, policy agent again forwards a request to the management point. There's a component on the management point known as MP_policy that receives that request, further processes it. The way the management point further processes it is by running queries against the database. That information will return back to this component, and ultimately forward back down to policy agent, and then down to policy evaluator. And policy evaluator, if there's actually a new policy to work with, will actually put it into place and then notify the affected components that there's additional work to do. So in our case, the additional affected component is Execution Manager. That's specific to package deployment. And then Execution Manager starts working on it, calls in a few other components to help it do its job. And in some cases, those other components, specifically location services here, will also talk back to the management point. And we'll see all that. So this is not to try to walk through all the activity just by this one little simple diagram, but again, to kind of line up and show you where we're somewhat going. So for the rest of this, we're going to spend time in the lab. First, before we get there, let's go ahead and pull the lab in, actually. Before we get into the actual demos, let's talk about logging. So understanding the logs, being able to read the logs, being able to follow the logs is pretty important to understand how things link together, how these processes work. So having the ability to see detail in these logs is also pretty critical to be able to piece all this together. So logging is in place on the client by default. It's a decent amount of logging, but it's not the most verbose level of logging that's possible. And really, to get a good sense of how things flow on the client, having really good verbose logging is important. So let's pop our client up here for a second. Okay. So here's our client. We'll get to Software Center in just a minute. We'll get to that in a minute. Or actually, that was from something else I was doing. Okay. So actually, before we even get to the verbose logging and that kind of thing, let's just talk about logging in general. So certainly, anytime you're looking at client activity, it's just a common rule of thumb. Pay attention to the time date stamp of the activity you're trying to perform, and then look at the logs and try to find logs that have been updated at the time date stamp that you would expect. So that will save you from looking in logs that really didn't update, didn't have anything to do at all with the operation you just performed, and you can focus on the ones that might have been involved. So to give you an example of that, I'm going to go ahead and pull up CMTrace. So whenever I'm looking at components and want to investigate, just as a good example, the new features in ConfigMgr 2012, when I'm trying to figure out what all logs are involved in actually getting some of the processing done so I can trace that through, see how logs relate to each other, that kind of thing, I do the exact thing I just mentioned. I will take an action, then look at my time date stamp when I took that action, line it up with the logs that are in play that I want to look at, and then try to look through those logs to stitch together what actually took place behind the scenes. One of the ways you can do that is really actually pretty cool. In ConfigMgr or CMTrace or even Trace32 for previous versions, you can go and open your logs. So if you click Open, let's say that we have these top series of logs. Maybe it's this grouping of logs that the time date stamp all lines up. Now, it obviously doesn't, but just follow the example. The time date stamp all lines up and correlates with recent activity. What I can do is just select to merge the selected files and click Open. When I do that, CMTrace is going to pull open all of the files together, line them up by time date stamp. So if, for example, log A logs an activity at 1 a.m. and then not again till 1:05 a.m., but log B has something at 1:01 a.m. and log C has something at 1:02 a.m., well, we're going to line those up. And so the first line you'll see is the line from log A, the second line is line from log B, log C, whatever. We line it up in time, date, chronology order, and still out to the side show you which log that line came from. So it's a really cool way to be able to look at all these logs in a composite view and kind of trace through and figure out what activity came where and how things might work together. Now, certainly when you do this, it's a possibility and a likelihood that you will open a log in the mix that really had nothing to do at all with the processing that you were doing. And in those cases, those are pretty easy generally to pick out, but still, it's a good thing to do. All right, so back to the verbose debug logging for a minute. So what what I always like to do when I'm approaching looking at the detail behind the scenes is enable what's known as verbose and debug logging on my client. Okay? There are certain things that you won't see unless you have logging set to verbose and debug level. So there's an easy way to do that manually in the registry of a client, and I'll show you that real quick, and then we'll talk about automated ways to do it. So if I open the registry, then this actually opens right to my registry key I want to be at. So I want to be in the CCM registry key, right here, Local Machine Software Microsoft CCM. And then there's a logging registry key. And this basically describes all the different components in the logging. And there's the @global component, which contains global settings for all the logs. So in here we have things like the logging directory and whether logging's enabled and how many historical logs to keep, by default 1, what the maximum size of the log is, and then this thing called log level. So log level gives us the ability to toggle additional information into the log. So this is actually set to the standard log level. If I actually change this to 0, that will move us to a verbose log level, and that's actually kind of just the reverse of what you might expect there, but it is true. So log level 0 is verbose logging. That additional level of logging will certainly give you more information in the logs, but there are still some things that you won't see just with verbose logging being in place. You also need to add another level of logging known as debug logging, and I actually have that, I believe, in place already in the registry here. Now, it's not here by default, but I believe it's already listed here, so let's see. Nope, doesn't look like it is. Okay, so let me go add it. So easy enough, we'll just add a new key. All right, and then we'll create a value, string value, enabled, and set it to true. Okay, so now I've configured both verbose and debug logging, okay, on the client side. Now, if we look at the client, we'll notice this is a bit of trivia. And again, we haven't gotten into the specifics of package deployment yet. All of this precursor is very important to that discussion, but again, it's not specific to packages. It's more specific to the client and various components on the client, so it's a good thing to have in place. So I'm opening the services node, and I want to show you, make some sense, tie a couple of things together here for you. So we're in the CCM registry key. So CCM is not a name that you're going to see anywhere really in your face on the client. So if we go into the service, as soon as this comes back, okay, coming up. All right, so if we scroll down the list of services, there's going to be one here called SMS Agent Host, right there. Okay. Now, if you look at the properties of this, you're going to see that the short name is CCMexec, or the path right here is CCMexec. Okay, and there's the CCM. Okay, so the CCM key in the registry is related to the client piece. Okay, now not just the client piece. So just like we have the verbose debug logging that we want to turn on the client, the component that the client will talk to and request policy and different things, exchange information with as part of processing, is the management point. The management point in my case exists on my site server where this client's assigned. So what I want to do is go enable verbose and debug logging on my management point as well. One thing to point out, let's get the registry editor open. So one thing to point out, and I actually have it already enabled here. So here's debug logging, and here, if I scroll up, I will see that I have the verbose level set already. And so what you'll see is even on my management point, I will have a CCM key. Okay. So in this case, my management point is on my primary site server, and my primary site server is also a client. So if you have a client installed, you're going to have the CCM registry key. If you have a management point installed without a client, without any other piece of ConfigMgr on the system, you're still going to have a CCM registry key. The CCM registry key will be populated differently if you just have the management point installed, or if you just have the client installed, or if you have both installed. Right? The point here is the CCM component, or the SMS agent host component, if you want to call it that, the framework is a better way to say it, that the client has is a shared framework with the management point. So the logging options that exist for the client are the same logging options that exist for the management point. And the same thing applies to the management point as it does to the client. There will be certain things that you will not be able to see unless you have verbose and debug logging turned on. So as a general rule of thumb, I recommend turning it on and having it enabled in the environment. Yes, it does take a few more cycles from the system to write additional information to the log files, but it just makes it easier to troubleshoot things whenever problems come up. Instead of having to go try to reproduce the issue and so on, it's nice if you can have the verbose and debug logging already in place and be able to track that information back. Okay, so your decision to make whether it's something you want to turn on or not, but it is oftentimes very useful to have it. So I've shown you how to do it manually in the registry, but that's not practical to do on a large scale purpose. So what you can also do is set verbose and debug logging on the command line when you install the client. So there's a couple of options. This one is one that will make sure that logging is turned on or off, whichever you prefer. By default, client logging is enabled, and don't recommend at all that you turn off client logging because it's very, very useful. However, if you want to disable client logging, there is a command line switch to do that. All right, and there's two other command line switches. One to enable verbose log level, this one, and then if you want to turn on debug logging, here. Okay, so if that is something you want to set in general in the environment, then you can add these to your command line and get the logging level set appropriately for you from client install. Okay, all right, good enough. So that said, let's just jump right into the demos. Okay, so where we are, let's just return to the site server for just a minute. In our demos, I have one package that I've created, and that package, as soon as the screen updates, there we go. So that package is my package demo deep dive. I've got two programs and thus two deployments. One is to demonstrate the run from distribution point scenario, and the other the download and execute scenario. So I'll run the run from DP scenario first. Again, this is for demonstration purposes. Run from DP is something that is not commonly used in environments since about SMS 2003, where we first introduced the ability to do what's known as download and execute. Okay, basically store the content in the local cache and run it locally. But it'll help demonstrate this option. So we'll do both of those. So that's all I'll do on the server side. Let's move to the client now, where we have this set up. So if we go to our client, basically I've already got that information staged on the client. Here it is in Software Center. I've got both of these packages here proactively, so I'm ready to go with them. So before I actually start executing these packages, let's talk about what had to happen behind the scenes in order for these packages to even be in Software Center. Okay? As soon as I deployed the packages in the console, then work took place on the server to prepare policy for the client. So whenever the client next checked in for policy, it would know there's something out there for it to do. Okay? We stopped on the server-side discussion as soon as we have policy prepared. So we pick up from that point on the client side. The component that is responsible for periodically going out and checking policy, I'm going to put a bookmark here, and checking policy to see if there's any work to be done, is this component called policy agent. So I've already in the past, checked in for policy, and I've pulled down as a result these particular packages. Right? So the way that happened, though, is that Policy Agent ran on its hour by default schedule and went up and made a request of the management point to find out, is there any additional work that needs to be done? Is there anything new for my client that I need to know about, download, and implement? Okay, so if I look at Policy Agent log, which I think is opening in the background, let's see, then I will see this is a little bit of a skewed timeline, perhaps. I have a VM here that I had saved off and reset some of the information based on some snapshotting and things, but still. So here's my Policy Agent log. So the Policy Agent log, if I go back to the processing loop where I was checking in, back around the AM time frame, scroll up a little bit, there we go, right around here, then I went and checked for policy, and I learned that there was work to be done. So let's scroll up here a little bit. So, oops, need to pause the log so I don't continue moving. There we go. So right around here, I'm going to go and request machine policy assignments. I'm going to request it for my primary site. And I'm going to wait until machine policy assignments come back. Here's me raising the request. I'm going to send it. Here's the ID of the client. Here's the time that I'm requesting it. Different information about it that I'm sending forward. Now, this is moving from the client to the management point, because the management point is the piece that actually goes and requests policy. So we'll see the management point side of this here in just a minute. But right now, I'm at this stage waiting for policy to come back from my management point. So here it is. Notice the timestamp, and I get back my policy from the management point. Okay, this is actually user policy. I'm just using this as an example. And then I can go ahead and process it, and notice I have 0 assignments. So I've asked for policy, I've received policy back, I don't have any changes to policy, so there's really nothing else for me to do. Okay. Well, now I'm going to go and request machine policy. Okay. Same thing, requesting it from my primary site, sending that forward. Okay, look at my timestamps, everything's lining up, there's about a 1-second gap, and I get my my assignments back. Okay. And then I start to process it. Look, I have 2 assignments, 2 policy updates. Here's one, compiling policy. I know this right away, that these 2 are the 2 packages that I've deployed. Why? Because I can see the package ID is 60 and 60. Okay? I can see that there's 2 different program IDs, and so on, C and D. Now, I know that. Let me correlate that for you real quick. So if I go back to the console, I know that 60 is my package ID, because when I go up here, I can look and see, here's 60. This is the one I created. It's package ID 60. Okay. Well, so that's that. Then as far as the programs, back on the client, the programs I was looking for are right here. D and C. The way I correlate that is back in the console. If I look here, let's see. Oops. So the console update. Okay, it looks like, give it a second here. Okay, and let's see if I can add a column. Can't remember if I can do that here or not. Package ID, program ID is what I'm looking for. Yeah, it's not going to show me. Okay, so let's see if I can have it over here. Hang on a minute. There we go. C and D. Okay, so on my deployment, I was looking in the wrong place. C and D. So here's the package ID 60. It's deployment ID C and D. And here, in fact, is the C and D. So you can kind of see how they map back and forth. And it's really useful to be able to follow it that way and map it back to the console, because if you're looking in the logs, and you know how to find the identifying information, it just makes things make a whole lot more sense. It doesn't always work this way. This is for packages. There are different identifiers for different kinds of things like software updates, configuration or compliance setting type things, even applications in some ways are different. But it all maps out similar. So anyway, I've got my two assignments. I'm compiling the policy, and here's the hash of the policy. Here's the version, that kind of thing. Okay, and so on, compiling this policy, and then I'm going to download the policy so that it's there. Okay, download a policy started. Data transfer service, DTS job ID. So data transfer service is responsible for moving content from the management point, from the database ultimately through the management point down to the client. We'll see DTS, data transfer service, happening in our package deployment in just a minute. Okay, and then finally we're done. We process through and we're done. Okay, so policy agent has retrieved the policy, it stored it into WMI. Okay, now so we see that we've raised an event, we've downloaded, we're going to store it into this namespace in WMI. This looks like a UNC. It's not. It's a namespace specifically in WMI. Okay. Here's the download source, so we're getting it from our management point. All right. So as you can tell, I'm not hitting. We're doing the download by bits. Right. So I'm not hitting every piece of detail in these logs. There's a lot of information here, and it's very useful information to be able to troubleshoot how things are actually happening. So we've just gotten the policy, we're downloading it, we're storing it into WMI, okay, and then ultimately we're succeeded, and we're moving on to download the next policy, we succeed, whatever, and we're done. So policy agent has retrieved the policy, it's stored it into WMI in the requested config namespace. I'll show you that in just a minute. Well, now that we're in the requested config namespace, we're still not active. We just simply retrieve the policy from the management point, and we know that there's work out there for us potentially to do. But we've not actually evaluated what work there is, if it's in a form that makes sense, or if it's a corrupt anything at all. We just have downloaded it locally. So at this stage, I would still see nothing over in Software Center for my packages. Now, in order to actually learn what that policy says that I'm supposed to do, I have to have another component in line, and that component is called Policy Evaluator. So as soon as I'm done here, let's look at our timestamps, 2:12:48. So as soon as I'm done with the download, the poll, then I'm going to bring in Policy Evaluator, notify Policy Evaluator there's some possible recent changes to policy, and let's go up to our timestamp. Right around here. Yeah, right around here. Okay, and we're going to go work on evaluating that policy. Let's see, here we go. Skipped up too far. Let's move down. And there's a lot of this moving around in the logs whenever you're looking at this level. Okay, so here we go. So updating policy. Okay, and applying policy. Okay, so that's the work we see in Policy Evaluator. We're actually looking at the policy, we're evaluating it, we're applying it, okay, and finding out what we need to do. All right, evaluating more policy. Again, I'm rolling through this. I'm not hitting everything, and so on. So basically, what we left in Policy Agent in requested config. Now we're ultimately evaluating it, finding out what that policy is, whether we need to apply it, what components need to be identified or notified as a result. So here's our two deployments of the package and other policy that's being applied. And you notice that there are different identifiers for each. Here's some compliance settings stuff, some other generic policy, and so on. So we're applying all that into the system. Okay. Now, let's scroll on down here for a minute. There's a name down here. I'll search for it in a minute if I don't find it. Scroll on down. There's a section where after we evaluate it, we're going to implement it. So let's see. Here, I'll search for it. Let's watch our timestamps. That's a good line of text. Oops. Let's find it this way. Nope, it's not doing it. Hang on a minute. Let's try it another way. There we go. So here we see that we're actually updating. So there's a section, there's a couple of things that you can look for in here. One is when we evaluate the policy, it may have rolled out of this log at this stage. When we evaluate the policy, we have in some cases a 2-minute pause as we're evaluating policy, moving it into this namespace you see here called actual config. So think of requested config as a staging area, if you will. And then policy evaluator looks at the policy in the staging area and implements it by putting it into another area in WMI called actual config. So this is where the policy is actually applied. Okay? So in this case, this is a user policy. You can tell by the name here. You'll see some machine policies as well. Let's see if we can find another one. Yeah, here's some machine policies where we're updating that portion of the namespace and so on. So basically, it's a two-step. It's a two-step. Starts in requested config. Policy evaluator evaluates it, moves it into the appropriate location in actual config. Once it's in actual config, then the components that are in line to act on that policy are able to see it and act upon it. So at this stage, we've downloaded, we've implemented the policy for our 2 packages, and the next step in line would be for Execution Manager to be notified that there's work to be done, and that's what we see here. Okay, so if we scroll up a bit, right around here, we see that, hey, we have where is it? Scroll up a bit. Here, I'll save myself some time and just search for number. Okay, there it is. So policy arrived, and I knew this was the package ID, 060 from previous work. So I went ahead and searched for it, and I must have just glanced right past it. But right here, policy arrived for the package. So this was because we were notified by policy evaluator. The work policy evaluator did, and now we know that there's work to be done. Okay, and here's the next section of it. So at this stage, now that Execution Manager knows there's work to do, we can see it over here in Software Center. Okay, so these packages are presented to us as available to execute. So let me put a bookmark here, talk about one more thing, put a bookmark here, and then look backwards for a minute. So when you deploy a package, you have a choice of making it either available or required. If it's available, then you're going to have what happened up until this point in the logs. We're going to download it. We're going to make it available. We're going to let Execution Manager know it's there. Execution Manager is going to display it so that the user can run it if they choose to. But that's it. Until the user actually takes an action, that's really all there is to do. If something is required, then you will see all the same stuff that you just saw, except once Execution Manager sees it, it does a little bit more processing to find out, is this something that needs to execute right now? Is it something that executes in the future? Do we need to download the content? And so on, which I'll talk to you about that more in a minute. And what do we need to do? Okay, but right now, we're just waiting for the user, myself, to take some action here to get the ball rolling. Well, before I take some action, I've mentioned a lot about namespaces in WMI. I've talked about WMI several times. So Config Manager on the client side and the server, but on the client side, has a very tight requirement on WMI. If the information we need is not in WMI, or if WMI is having problems or whatever, we're not going to be able to do really anything. So what is this WMI structure? Well, let's go look at it for a minute. So if I go, the easiest way to kind of get a lay of the land of WMI is to go into Computer Management. So if I open Computer Management, which will take a second here probably to open. Hopefully it's in the process. Okay, so it opens. So if we go into Services and Applications and look at WMI Control. So WMI Control is an interface that will allow you to visualize the sandbox, if you will, of WMI. So you can see information about the version of WMI and different things, stuff that we don't really care about here. You can back up and restore the repository, whatever. But what we care about is security, specifically from the perspective of being able to see all of the namespaces that are in the WMI repository right now. So, brief tangent. So I'm going to proceed through this discussion assuming that that there's a basic understanding of namespaces and classes and things like that in WMI. If this is your first exposure to WMI, this is something that is really a gold mine of information for you as you look at the client and, again, the server. ConfigMgr uses WMI heavily, and there's some really cool things you can learn about, do, see in WMI. So if this is your first exposure to WMI, definitely take some time here and look around, get familiar with the namespaces and different things that are WMI. If it's totally a foreign concept to you, take a pause, go learn about WMI. It's a gold mine of information for ConfigMgr and other applications, and then what you'll see in here will become a richer experience. You'll learn more about how you can use WMI and so on by doing that. All right, so that said, let's just take a look. These are the various namespaces that are in WMI. This is the default system load. There's nothing here really other than ConfigMgr that's not part of the default load. If you look in your production environment, you're going to possibly, very likely, see more things in WMI than I have here. So one of the points to be made, kind of again a tangent, one of the common troubleshooting techniques for systems that are having problems with WMI is to just simply go out and blow away the repository, rebuild it, and restore functionality for your application. Sometimes you can't avoid that, but there are implications. So I show you this list just to show you how many things are in WMI. So if you're blowing away WMI just to fix ConfigMgr, you're also blowing away all these other things. Hopefully most of them rebuild. That's often the case. Sometimes things won't, and you'll have problems and have damage to other applications as a result. So just be aware. Right? One of the things in the 2012 client is we're really aggressive about making sure that WMI is healthy for the ConfigMgr client because we depend upon it so much. That's one of the things that our automated health tools do in the 2012 client. Okay, so anyway, so here is the WMI namespace for ConfigMgr. We have a whole bunch of different components underneath, and the names of these are pretty self-explanatory as to what they are. There's a few here that are going to be relative to our discussion today. Certainly here's the policy namespace, and you saw me refer to that, the actual config, requested config. We have policy now for the machine. We also have the user policy. Okay? User policy is something we didn't pay a whole lot of attention to in previous versions of ConfigMgr because, frankly, we didn't really make it a real robust experience for working with the user in previous versions. Now, in ConfigMgr 2012, I expect to see a lot more activity in the user policy settings as we do work with the user more. So here's the actual config namespace. Here's the requested config namespace, and there's nothing underneath these. It's the bottom of the barrel here. So as we retrieved our policy, it moved into the requested config namespace. As Policy Evaluator worked on it, it moved into the actual config namespace. And then ultimately, Execution Manager was notified there's some pieces inside the actual config namespace that contain that information. So this gives you, again, the structure. This does not give you the detail. Okay? For the detail, we have to use another tool. Oh, and by the way, there's a couple of more namespaces in here that we'll just quickly look at during our session today. One is up here, Location Services. Then we'll quickly touch in on Content Transfer Manager and Data Transfer Service. So all of these will be at play during our demos today. All right, so we'll leave that up, and let's just open up and take a look at this policy namespace we've been in so far. So the tool I use is WebMTest. There are other tools out there to look inside the WMI namespaces. This is the one I prefer. It's part of the default system, and it's the one that I've gotten accustomed to using, so we will use it. So I need, if I'm going to browse a namespace, I need to connect to that namespace. So I'm just going to connect, move this over so you can see it. Actually, I've already moved past it. Okay, so I'll just type it in because I know what it is. I'm just going to connect to root /CCM /policy machine requested config. Okay, so this is going to be the first stopping point for the policy as it's downloaded. If I look at this, I see that this namespace has a bunch of information in it for all sorts of different client pieces. There's the malware for endpoint protection. There's collections. I believe that was collections, is it? Hang on. Yeah, collection variables, client configuration settings, hardware inventory settings, so on. So there's a whole bunch of things. Again, this is the stopping place as policy comes down. So if there's going to be change implemented on the client, this is where it first has to go to get evaluated. So for our software deployments, we have our namespace here, software distribution, CCM_software distribution. Come on down. And some of the namespaces here between requested and actual will not be the same, but there will be a lot of similarity. So here's software distribution. So if I look in here, I'm just going to do it quickly, and look at instances, then I will see here are the two policies, one for each deployment, that I want to implement on my client. So they're put here so that the policy evaluator can come look at them and decide whether we want to implement them and where they go and so on. So look at the structure here, and you'll see that it's a little bit different when we get to the actual config namespace. So here's where it is. I won't go any further in requested because the real interesting stuff where we notify the components of the client is in the actual config. So let's go to this same namespace over in actual config. So easily enough, I just have to change this to actual config. And there we go. And name classes again, recursive, okay. And we'll go down to the same namespace. You see some similarities there, definitely some changes. Okay, so software distribution, same namespace. This time, though, this is live data. Okay, data that's actually in place. And so you'll see here's the same information. It's formatted a little bit differently. Okay, but essentially the same information. All right, and here's our program IDs. Here's the run from DP demo. Here's the download and execute demo. So if I want to look at the way this is configured, I can just double click on it and then click on Show Off. And here I can see all the detail about this particular deployment, when it becomes active, whether it's published, what the advertisement ID is, or deployment ID in the console, whether it's mandatory, all these different things, what the name is, whether we're going to rerun always, and so on. So I can just keep on scrolling down and see every bit. Here's the command line. See every bit of detail about this particular deployment right here, what the requirements are, of it, and so on. So a really rich repository that you can use to validate the UI, to make sure that things actually arrive the way they're supposed to. Let me give you an interesting scenario. This is not really packages, it's more applications, but it kind of illustrates the point. So why would you ever want to be in here? Well, one of the things, again, apologize, this isn't package specific, it's application, but it plays here. So with applications, the application model, you may deploy an application to your clients, go to that client, see that it never shows up in Software Center, and you're scratching your head wondering, why does this thing never show up? Hasn't the client learned about it? You go through the logs, you find out it looks like the client certainly knows about it. Where is it, right? Well, if you go into WMI, into this namespace, or similar for the application, you can absolutely validate whether the client actually knows about the application or it doesn't, right? There is one scenario for sure in the application world where the client may learn about the application, but just never display it to you in Software Center. A good example of that would be if that application has requirements set. So if the system doesn't, if there's requirements on the app, but the system evaluates that app and realizes that the conditions on the app prevent it from running on the system, then it just never presents it. It won't even show it in Software Center because it's not a valid app for the system. It doesn't meet the requirements. So that might present kind of a confusing scenario at first to find out, well, is something broken? It's not showing up. No, nothing's broken. It's doing what it's supposed to do, and you can validate that by just looking in WMI and finding out, yeah, in fact, the client does know about it, evaluated it, and made the decision not to show it up. That's just one example of valuable uses of the information in WMI. So here's for your deployments. You can, for your package deployment, or software deployments in this case, you could just as easily learn about your configuration for your client. So if you want to know how your specific client for the software distribution agent is configured on the system, easy enough. Just look again at instances, double click on it, show them off, and you'll see all the detail about how the particular client agent is configured to respond. Okay, so very, very useful information. Okay. All right, so enough about that right now. We'll come back to WebM test here in a minute. And again, as you can tell, a ton of information in here. We're just barely scratching the surface, and hopefully I'm whetting your appetite to want to look deeper, or at least piquing an interest if you are troubleshooting and kind of want to follow along, maybe with the Microsoft Support Engineer, or take a peek yourself or whatever. There's useful information in here. Okay, so that said, let's go ahead and leave this for now and go and run our deployment. So I've got a couple of logs. Let me close them. Oops. Let me close that. So what I want to do is start by running my run from distribution point deployment. So again, run from distribution point simply means that instead of downloading the content locally, we're going to make a network connection to the distribution point and run it remotely. Okay? It's not a scenario that's very often in use today. In fact, whenever the option to download content to the local cache first became available in SMS 2003, the usage of the run from distribution point really decreased because there's so many efficiencies with downloading to the cache and running locally. But it'll give us a chance just to at least see this and see some differences. So when I click install, what's going to happen is I'm going to go out and try to run this application. And to do so, I'm going to reach across to the distribution point remotely and run it from there. So here we go. We're waiting to install, and we'll see the command prompt show up. It's just a very simple batch file, and show up and stay open, waiting for me to interact. So there it is. Okay. So what happened though behind the scenes? Right. So we already know that the first component in line for running this is Execution Manager. We've already seen that. So let's look at this log again, and again paying attention to our timestamp. Here it's 3:12-ish when this started, so let's put a pause on this and move to the top of our processing loop. So long about here, there we are. So long about here, we see that there is a request here to run the program, verifying package, run from DP. We're going to have an optional execution request. So we went ahead and selected it. That was me clicking go. Okay, so we're creating an optional execution request to run this package, which is run from DP. That's the name of it. So the first thing we have to do before we can actually run this is find out where is the content that we need to look at to be able to run this, right? We know that there's a program out there to run, a package program to run. We know that we just tried to run it, but at this stage we don't know where we're located in relation to available distribution points. So we talked about roaming in some previous discussions, right? It could be that my client is located within the boundaries of a distribution point in its home site. It could be that my client is located within the boundaries of a distribution point in a different site, but we can still use those distribution points. We need to look up and find that out. Could be that my client's in a hotel room, not in the boundaries of any site, right? Not local, if you will, to any distribution points. We need to figure all that out and find out what is the most efficient distribution point to run from, and if we're allowed to run at all. So that's the process we go through now, is to access our content source. Content Access Service is what CAS stands for. So we're going to make a call in to request that content access service looks up the content for package 60. So at this stage, if you're just looking at this log, you wouldn't really understand that the execution of this log is pausing, if you will, and handing off to another component. So Execution Manager can't do the lookup on its own. It has to call in another service known as CAS. So CAS has its own log. And by the way, let me mention this here. So as we start to go through this, you might ask the question, okay, I see that we're moving in and looking at all these different components. Why in the world do we have to have all these different components? Why can't Execution Manager do all this on its own? Well, it could, right? But think of it this way. This package is just one kind of content that the client may need to access over time. There's packages, there's applications, there's task sequences, there's software updates, there's on, right? So instead of having to re-engineer the process for each piece of the client, we just work with the client calling into similar components to do all the content location. That's what's happening here. CAS locates the content for everything, right, that needs content. So here we're making a call to CAS. All right, so let's go look at the CAS log. So if we scroll up and find CAS, here we are. So again, we're going to follow the timestamp, and let's go to the other log. So we notice right here we're at 3:12:41. So if we go to 3:12:41 in this log, we should see some activity. In fact, you should see the activity starts at 3:12:41. Here it is. Right? So now we're getting content. So we're running through some initial stuff, figure out what all kind of communication is allowed, and now we're going to begin checking. We're going to make a location request. Okay, so it's not real obvious here, but we're making a location request up to find out what distribution points are available. So this again might seem a little bit odd. CAS is responsible for locating the content, but CAS doesn't actually locate the content itself. It will hand off to another component known as Location Services. Location Services' job in life is to locate different things, right? In this case, distribution points. So we're going to go up and make a request of Location Services. Okay. Local machine. Let's see. Raise local machine location. Let's see. Is this it? Make sure it is. Yeah, right here. Content location request. Right here is the request. Let me correlate that to time. 12:41. Yeah. So I just skipped over it. So CAS is submitting a location request. Here's the location information, the call in to CAS, if you will, from Execution Manager. Then CAS processes that and submits a location request. You see this location request has a bunch of information that we're passing over. It has the content, the package ID that we want. It has the assigned site. It has the IP address information for our client. So all we're doing is taking this and handing this to Location Services. So again, if I look at the timestamp, 3:12:36, okay, then go down to Location Services, that's a log into its own. Right here. So I should have some activity there. Let's pause it. Oops. Right around in here. There we are. Okay, so right around 3:12:36, we have some activity where Location Services fires up. Okay, now, we don't really see a request out at this stage. We do see a reply. Here's our reply. But we don't really see clearly the request from Location Services. Okay, we see Location Services verifying message, or where is this? Let's see. Yeah, getting MPs, whatever. So essentially, we don't see the request clearly going out. But what's happening is Location Services is going, again, Location Services by itself cannot look up the information because Location Services on the client doesn't have it. but location services can form the request and send it forward to the management point, which has the ability to query the database. So at this stage, location services has received the request and is forwarding it to our management point. So if I look at my primary site at MP location, okay, and this is one of those logs that is useless to us unless we have verbose and debug logging turned on. So if I look at MP location at the same time frame, then I will see this location request come in. So let's open that up. All right. So right around here, let's see. Yeah, right around here. So we'll see where is it? Message body. So this is the request. You can see because it maps the same information. It's looking for 60 content or package ID 60. It's looking for, or it's submitting the IP addresses of our client. It's from our client. Let's see. Yeah, I don't see the NetBIOS name in here of the client, but this is the client. The IP address matches up, so we do that. So we're going to take this XML that we receive. We're going to open it up, unpack it. It's a content request looking for this package ID. We know it's a package. It's at this site code. It's at this AD site. Okay, and so now we're going to go actually look and find out if there are any distribution points that have that package that are accessible to us based on our IP boundary or Active Directory site boundary configuration. So the very next line, this entry MP underscore, is going to go out and request a match for DPs from the database. So if you look just at this line, it may not be immediately obvious what's happening, but what this is a stored procedure. So this stored procedure is working against the database and going to look up the information. There's certain parameters and all that go along with it. If you really need to trace the detail of that stored procedure, it's possible. But suffice it to say that stored procedure runs and we get a result back. Now, that result could be a distribution point. In this case, it is. Right? So we see the processing go forward and we end up seeing a reply. Let's go on down a little bit. A reply down here that contains the DP, where we can go get the package right here. Now, but it's just as likely or just as possible that there may be no distribution points that are accessible to the client with the location. In the location the client's in. Maybe the client's roaming. Maybe the client's in a hotel room and you aren't allowing the content to run across a link that we can't detect as being local or whatever. Maybe the client's at a remote site where you haven't deployed the content to its DP. You know, there's all sorts of scenarios that could come into play that we touched on briefly talking about roaming earlier in the series. So, but in this case, we get a DP back and we send it down. Okay, so we're sending our reply. Here's our reply body. We're going to send it down to the client that requested, which is ours. Here's how long it takes. Here's the message body going down, and essentially we're done on the management point side. Okay, so if we go back to our client then, still in location services, here we actually get the location reply body. It's the exact same thing we had for the management point. Here's the DP that we can go to. So at this stage, location services is done and hands that back to CAS. So if we look back at CAS, we'll see right here. Here's our reply body. So we can see all that happened within 4 seconds. Sometimes it's even faster than that. Okay. And then once we have that, then we can continue down the process and ultimately hand that back to, here's the distribution points. We unpack it, and we're going to send that back ultimately to Execution Manager, and then we're done. Okay. So over in Execution Manager, if we keep looking down, again, skipping over a lot of stuff, there's a lot of detail here, good stuff. So scroll on down, we'll actually see that we're going to connect up and run from here. So here's our content location that we got. Here's our command line that we're going to run. Okay, right Here's the batch file. Okay. And so on. Then we launch the application and we're done. So this is still running. Let's see how long it's been. I might leave that running for a minute. Let's see. 12, so 25. Yeah, let's leave that running for a minute. So what I want to try to show you, we'll see. I'll give it a couple minutes to run. What I'm hoping to see is that this will actually shut down on us, and then we'll see what happens in just a minute. So let's scroll to the bottom of the log and see what happens. So I'll come back in just a couple minutes, and we'll see what happened. Okay, so since we were close enough, I wanted to go ahead and pause the recording so I could show you this. So I've talked about previously how setting the maximum runtime for an application is really important, not just whenever you're using maintenance windows, but in general, so that you have some sort of predictability. You don't have processes that just hang the system forever in case there's a problem, whatever. So my batch file is basically still sitting here. The command prompt is still open. That's another discussion, right? But essentially, I ran the batch file, and the batch file was open, waiting for a response for greater than 15 minutes. So I had configured a 15-minute max runtime. So right here, 15 minutes later, I had not closed the application. The application was hung. So basically, the exit of the application was forced. So if you scroll on down, you can see down here, program ran past its maximum runtime. It will be orphaned. It will be basically let go of, right? So we're not just going to hold the client up forever, waiting for something to finish. We will go ahead and execute or go ahead and close it out and move on. So since I was close enough to that, I wanted to go ahead and show it to you as I wrapped up. So that really is it when it comes to, and we see a failed as a result because it exceeded the maximum runtime. Okay. So I went ahead and closed it down, but there we go. That's the reason it failed. So that's it as far as running it from the distribution point. Pretty easy stuff. Now let's go back and run this from, or run this other one, which is download and execute. So all of the same stuff that I just talked about generally will apply. We're going to start in Execution Manager. Execution Manager will need to locate the content in CAS. CAS will return back the distribution point, but at that stage, we're going to recognize that this is not a deployment to be run from the distribution point. We're going to need to download the content into our cache. Okay, so let's show you that. So in Configuration Manager 2012 on the client, the cache folder is located parallel to the CCM folder. So in Windows, here's CCM cache. So this is the directory, if you will, that all of the content will get staged to. So I'll pull that off to the right. And pull this off to the, or pull that off to the left, pull this off to the right a bit. So as soon as I hit go on this, what I would expect is to see another letter show up in this list. So this is also worth talking about. So the cache directory in Configuration Manager 2012 is a little bit different. Whenever we have new content coming into the cache, it just gets the next consecutive letter, if you will, or identifier that way, assigned to it. That means that if you look at 5 different clients, all with the same deployment, they may or may not all have the same letter or designator associated with the content in the cache. That wasn't so much the case in previous versions, but is in this version. So just a difference there. So let's go ahead and hit install. So it'll churn here for a minute, and we'll see if we looked at it. I won't spend the time to take you down the same rabbit hole. There you go. You just saw letter Q come in, so we're preparing for download. So we have activity, the same kind of activity in Execution Manager. CAS has certainly been invoked, so we will actually start in CAS. So here we go. Let's open up CAS. And following our timestamp, I'll go ahead and pause this. Okay, and scroll up a bit. So this activity all started happening about here. There we go, right about there. Okay, so right at the top of our processing loop. Okay, here we're requesting locations. We get our location sent. That's location services to the management point. I'll reply back, same thing as before. But now this time, notice that we need to download the content. So we notice, here we go, calling back with distribution points, rolling on down. We notice that we're going to have to download. Where do we see that? Okay, hang on. Let me see if I can find it. Okay, HTTP download is allowed. Okay, I may be skipping right over it, but we realize that we need to download it, and you can tell that. Let's see. You can tell that as we start to move into the download here. So we're requesting our content. It's going to get cached content. So you start to see that here. So we're going to store it in the local cache. So we need to figure out where we're going to store it. So we're going to start to check, find out cache info, figure out the configuration, see if we have enough free disk space in the cache. Right. So we talked a little bit about the cache, how as content moves into the cache, it will consume space until we're done with it, and then we'll mark it for deletion. And if we need the space, that content will be eligible to delete and that kind of thing, unless you've set the flag on the package application persist content in cache. So that's what we're checking to make sure we have plenty of space in the cache. If we don't, then we'll fail. See if we have to delete anything to free up space. We don't. So have plenty of space. So we're good to go. So now we're going to go ahead and download the content, and we're going to put it in the cache folder in the letter Q directory. Okay. So save completed. So now we're going to start looking for DPs, and ultimately we're going to create a download request. Okay. So here's another example. CAS doesn't actually do the download. CAS is the process that calls for the download, but it doesn't do it itself. It's handing off to another component. So if we look at 336.01 and then go look at logs, additional logs, then we'll notice, if we trolled through them long enough, we'll notice that the very next log in line is Content Transfer Manager. So Content Transfer Manager 336.01 kicks in, and we start to actually go get this data. Okay, so downloading. Actually, let's go back down here. So we're starting our download because we're asked to. Notice, hang on, let me pull this off to the side. Where's CAS? Here. So let's see, D00. Right here. Submitted CTM job, Content Transfer Manager 6D81. So then if we go to this log and see, here we should be able to find 6D81. So we're evaluating our job, starting it up, and we're starting to download. So we've initialized, we start to go through, we're downloading data, and so on. So, but again, Content Transfer Manager is not the one that actually does the transfer. It is Data Transfer Service that does the transfer. So if we go to Data Transfer Service and look at its log, we're going to notice that there's actually should be work actually going on right now where we're moving the file. So here we see, yeah, right now we're actually moving the content. So here's the job ID 8FC. Let's see if we can track that back. But you can see we're rolling. So 8FC. Let's just see if we can find that in Content Transfer Manager log. Yeah, DTS jobs. So here it is, right here in the middle of it. So we, from CAS, called into Content Transfer Manager with that job ID. Content Transfer Manager goes to Data Transfer Service, calls in with this job ID that we just saw, and Data Transfer Service goes and starts the download, and we're basically have all three of these components talking back and forth. Data Transfer Service is doing the work. Content Transfer Manager is keeping track of it and passing that back to CAS, and ultimately we'll be done with the transfer, and then we'll be able to run the application. So we can see we're about 53% done right now. So I'm going to close this window. I want to go into WMI and show you another couple of namespaces. So if we go back into Computer Management real quick, I'm going to try to be able to see all of this. Content Transfer Manager and Data Transfer Service have their own namespace. So does Location Services. I'll remember to come back to that in just a minute. Didn't show you that earlier. So if we go into WebM Test and look first at Content Transfer Manager, So these are not complicated namespaces, but they're basically places that we keep track of activity as things are rolling. When you look at these, normally, if there's no activity going on, these should be empty. But if there's activity going on, then then we will have data here. Let's see, not there. Let's close that. As we're tracking through, yeah. So here's some of the jobs that are going through. We can see the details of the jobs that they're getting package 60, where they're getting it from, that kind of thing. Okay. So we can definitely see activity. Let's see what else is down here. Okay, so here's our job ID. Again, we're getting package 60, where we're getting it or putting it into the cache folder that we're putting into, and so on. So you see all of this information, very good information. So let's go look at data transfer service. All right, so same as before, we shouldn't have nothing here if we're not working, but we actually are working at the moment. So let's go into this. So here's our job, our DTS job. You'll recognize the same GUID right here, 8FC. So if we show MOF, again, we see where we're putting the data that we're transferring. And then if we look at this other namespace, we'll actually see the files, one by one, that we're transferring, and the status, and so on. So here are all the files, right? So if we scroll over, we'll see information, the file order, and so on. So if we show MOF on it, here's the job ID, here's the file name that we're transferring, and so on. All right. So again, just good information to know where things are. If things go south, you need to troubleshoot anything. You know what kind of activity takes place where. So real quick. So that's still downloading. We should see that it will pop up and run that batch file in just a minute. So just like we have placeholders for tracking our jobs in progress here, we have the same for location services. So I shouldn't have anything here because I don't have any location request in order or in progress right now. But the same kind of thing. We can track our location request. Should be empty right now, and it is, right? But the point of this is these are all the nooks and crannies of the system that we'll put stuff into as we're processing through. Here we're 81% done, so we should see it pop up in a minute. So different corners of the system we'll put things in as we process, as we get things done, and places we can look if there's troubleshooting problems. I'll give you an example on the location services one. Okay. If you have, and I've seen this several times, if you have a scenario where your client is making a location request but never getting a reply, well, that's a bad scenario. You should always get a reply for a location request. If you're not getting a reply, there's a reason for it. It could be that you're not able to communicate effectively to the management point or something else, right? But until we get a reply, those location requests, they're created for a reason. They actually need to be serviced in order to get the job done of deploying the content. So they're going to sit there in WMI waiting for an open channel to get a response. So if you look in location services and you see some things backed up in WMI, it's not a healthy sign often. So it should be empty if everything is going along okay. Certainly on a busy system, on a normal production client, you might have some things in there transient, if you go in there and look at it, because the system's processing things. But in my lab, certainly, it's a very isolated environment, very antiseptic environment, if you will, not a whole lot going on that I'm not directly telling it to do. So it's easier to see some things. So anyway, that's a brief tour through WMI and through the client. And again, we're going to let this finish processing. The reason understanding all this is really pretty important is because we have so many fingers into these components through various client pieces. It's not just packages. It's certain ones of these components you'll see in application discussion next time. You'll see these still highlight and show up in software updates discussion. You'll see in various pieces of the client where all of these similar components work. So if you understand it here, if you understand it in one place, you're going to understand it in those places too. So one last thing that I'll do real quick is to show you, this is not package related necessarily at all, but to show this to you real quick, let me take you to my blog. And you see, by the way, that just finished downloading and popped up, so we're good to go. So I did, based on my Microsoft Management Summit session in 2011, I converted that to entries in my blog. So if you're interested to know exactly how, in this case, the software updates components work and how they make use of these components, it's here. And I show this to you because we've talked about location services. We've talked about MP location. We've talked about some of these other things, like down here, we've talked about data transfer services and content transfer manager and so on. So I walked through even the software updates logs. This is in 2007, but applies very similarly in 2012 to show you how all these components hand off between each other and where they get involved. Show you in WMI, the different things. So if that's of interest, and again as an illustration to how broadly used these components are, it's interesting. So that said, we're done with this session, and the next time we get together, we'll talk about the same kind of thing, but with the applications in mind, and we'll see that there's some similarity to what we talked about today, but also some pretty significant differences in ways too. So we'll see you next time.